The Earth trembles beneath our feet as nature demonstrates its raw power. The first signs emerge quietly, subtle vibrations that seismographs detect across the globe, marking the beginning of an unprecedented geological event. Deep within the planet's crust, magmatic pressures build steadily. Volcanic gases accumulate, creating immense forces that push against ancient rock layers. The initial breakthrough occurs as fissures split open, releasing superheated steam and gases into the atmosphere. These early emissions serve as harbingers of the larger eruptions to follow. Seismic stations worldwide record a dramatic spike in activity. The interconnected network of tectonic plates responds to the mounting pressure, triggering earthquakes that ripple outward from the primary volcanic sites. These tremors range from minor shakes to significant magnitude events that affect populations thousands of miles from the epicenters. As the first hour progresses, towering plumes of volcanic ash begin their ascent into the stratosphere. The ash clouds, composed of pulverized rock, glass fragments, and mineral particles, rise up to 30,000 feet. These dark columns cast shadows across the landscape as they spread laterally, carried by high-altitude winds. The atmospheric effects become apparent within minutes. The ash particles interact with water vapor, creating localized weather phenomena. Static electricity generates lightning within the ash clouds, producing spectacular but dangerous electrical displays. The combination of ash and atmospheric moisture leads to peculiar precipitation patterns, including acid rain in affected regions. Ground-based observers report a progression of visual and auditory signals. The sky takes on unusual colors as sunlight filters through the spreading ash. Low-frequency sounds, too deep for human ears to detect but registered by specialized equipment, emanate from the eruption sites as magma moves through underground chambers. Temperature fluctuations occur in areas near the volcanic activity. Heat from the eruptions creates thermal updrafts, affecting local weather patterns and air pressure systems. These changes ripple through the atmosphere, influencing wind patterns and cloud formation far beyond the immediate vicinity of the volcanic sites. The initial hour sees rapid changes in air quality across affected regions. Volcanic gases, including sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide, mix with the atmosphere. These emissions begin to affect visibility and air quality, prompting early warning systems to activate in populated areas. Geological instruments record the formation of new ground features. Fissures appear along fault lines, and existing cracks widen as the Earth's crust responds to the intense geological forces. In some locations, the ground deforms visibly, creating bulges and depressions that reflect the movement of magma beneath the surface. Wildlife responds instinctively to the changing conditions. Animals display unusual behavior patterns, moving away from areas of increased volcanic activity. Their natural sensitivity to environmental changes serves as an additional indicator of the escalating geological event. The ocean responds to the seismic activity with subtle but measurable changes. Pressure waves travel through the water, affecting marine life and creating minor disturbances in normal wave patterns. These oceanic responses contribute to the global network of monitoring data that scientists use to track the event's progression. As the first hour draws to a close, the initial phase of volcanic activity establishes patterns that will influence subsequent developments. The combination of seismic activity, atmospheric changes, and geological transformations sets the stage for escalating events in the hours to follow. The volcanic debris spread across the upper atmosphere, creating a thick blanket that filtered solar radiation. Sulfur dioxide from the eruptions combined with water vapor, forming sulfuric acid aerosols that reflected sunlight back into space. These particles, suspended 15 to 25 kilometers above Earth's surface, initiated a period of global cooling. Temperature recordings showed immediate effects. Within days of the eruptions, average global temperatures dropped by 0.5 degrees Celsius. The cooling intensified as more particles accumulated in the stratosphere, leading to a 1.5-degree decrease by the end of the first week. Weather stations across multiple continents reported these changes, with the most significant drops occurring in regions closest to the eruption sites. The reduced sunlight affected photosynthesis in plants. Farmers noticed crops growing slower, and agricultural scientists measured a 30% reduction in photosynthetic activity. The darker conditions triggered unusual behavioral changes in both wild and domestic animals. Birds reduced their daily activity periods, and nocturnal creatures extended their hunting times into what would typically be daylight hours. Atmospheric scientists tracked the spread of the volcanic cloud using satellite data and ground-based measurements. The particulate matter circled the globe in distinct bands, following stratospheric wind patterns. The density of the aerosol layer varied by region, with some areas experiencing near-twilight conditions during midday. The altered sky colors became a defining characteristic of this period. The scattered volcanic particles created unusual optical effects, turning sunrises and sunsets into deep crimson displays. During daylight hours, the sky often appeared pale gray or brownish, rather than its typical blue. These effects served as visible indicators of the atmospheric changes occurring miles above the Earth's surface. Weather patterns shifted as the cooling progressed. Areas accustomed to regular rainfall experienced extended dry periods, while other regions faced unusual precipitation. The temperature differential between the ground and upper atmosphere created unstable conditions, leading to increased storm activity in certain areas. The global cooling triggered changes in air circulation patterns. The jet stream shifted its typical course, bringing cold Arctic air further south than normal. This redistribution of air masses affected regional weather systems, creating new patterns of precipitation and temperature variations across continents. Marine ecosystems showed early signs of disruption. The cooler temperatures and reduced sunlight decreased phytoplankton productivity in surface waters. These microscopic organisms, forming the base of marine food chains, experienced population declines that rippled through ocean ecosystems. Agricultural regions faced immediate challenges. The combination of reduced sunlight and lower temperatures slowed plant growth rates. Farmers reported delayed maturation in crops, with some plants showing signs of stress from the altered growing conditions. Agricultural scientists began documenting these effects, creating data sets to understand the impact on food production. The atmospheric changes affected solar power generation. Solar farms reported significant decreases in energy output, with some facilities experiencing up to 60% reduction in power generation. This sparked concerns about renewable energy reliability during extended periods of reduced solar radiation. The darkened conditions impacted human activities beyond agriculture and energy production. Construction projects faced delays due to reduced visibility. Transportation systems adapted their schedules and safety protocols to account for the darker conditions. Schools and businesses adjusted their operating hours to maximize use of available natural light. Scientists intensified their monitoring efforts during this period. Research stations worldwide collected data on temperature variations, atmospheric composition, and radiation levels. This information proved valuable for understanding the relationship between volcanic activity and climate change, providing insights into similar events in Earth's geological history. The reduced solar radiation began affecting seasonal patterns. Plants that typically responded to day length as a signal for seasonal changes showed altered growth and flowering patterns. This disruption extended to migratory animals, which faced challenges in their typical seasonal movement patterns. The volcanic eruptions' effects extend beyond darkened skies and temperature drops. The massive quantities of sulfur dioxide and other gases ejected into the atmosphere undergo chemical transformations. These compounds mix with water vapor and oxygen, creating sulfuric acid and other acidic substances that return to Earth through precipitation. The chemical process begins high in the atmosphere where sulfur dioxide, SO2, interacts with water molecules, H2O, and oxidizes to form sulfuric acid, H2SO4. This reaction occurs continuously as long as volcanic gases remain suspended in the air. The resulting acid droplets fall as rain, snow, or fog, with PHEV levels potentially dropping below 4.0, significantly more acidic than typical rain, which has a pH of approximately 5.6. This acidic precipitation affects vast geographical areas, often falling hundreds or thousands of miles from the volcanic source. The wind patterns and atmospheric conditions determine the distribution of these acid-laden clouds, creating regions of concentrated impact. Plants experience leaf damage and reduced growth rates when exposed to this caustic rainfall. The acid strips protective waxy coatings from leaves and disrupts photosynthesis processes. Water bodies receive direct hits from acid rain, causing rapid pH changes that stress aquatic life. Fish populations decline as their eggs fail to develop in acidified waters. Coral reefs bleach and deteriorate under the chemical assault. The altered water chemistry affects the entire aquatic food chain, from microscopic plankton to large predatory species. Soil chemistry changes as acid rain leaches essential nutrients and releases toxic metals. Aluminum, normally bound safely within soil particles, becomes soluble and toxic to plant roots. Calcium and magnesium, crucial for plant growth, wash away. These soil changes persist long after the acid rain stops, creating lasting agricultural impacts. Human structures face accelerated deterioration from acid precipitation. Limestone and marble buildings, statues, and monuments dissolve slowly as the acid eats away at their calcium carbonate composition. Metal structures corrode more rapidly, requiring increased maintenance and replacement. Paint peels and concrete weakens under the constant chemical exposure. The acidic fog and mist pose direct health risks to humans and animals. Respiratory issues increase as people inhale acidic water droplets. Skin and eye irritation become common complaints. The very young and elderly prove particularly susceptible to these health effects. Agricultural crops show varying levels of damage. Some species display greater sensitivity to acid exposure, with visible leaf spots and stunted growth appearing within days of exposure. Root vegetables absorb increased levels of toxic metals from affected soils. Grain yields decrease as plants struggle to maintain normal growth patterns under chemical stress. Forest ecosystems experience compound effects from acid precipitation. Trees weaken as their nutrient uptake becomes impaired. This weakness makes them more susceptible to diseases and insect attacks. Young seedlings fail to establish themselves in acidified soils, disrupting natural forest regeneration cycles. Wildlife populations face multiple challenges from acid rain impacts. Their food sources become contaminated or scarce. Water sources turn toxic. Breeding grounds degrade. Species that cannot adapt or relocate face potential local extinction events. The acid rain creates a feedback loop in the environment. As vegetation dies off, less carbon dioxide gets absorbed from the atmosphere. Decomposing plant matter releases additional carbon dioxide. These changes contribute to ongoing climate effects triggered by the volcanic eruption. Recovery from acid rain damage requires time, even after the precipitation returns to normal fade levels. Soils need years to rebuild their mineral content and restore proper chemical balance. Lakes and streams gradually return to healthy fade levels through natural buffering processes. Plant and animal populations slowly re-establish themselves in affected areas. The chemical composition of Earth's oceans undergoes significant alterations through both natural and human-induced processes. Temperature variations across ocean layers create distinct zones where marine life adapts to specific conditions. These zones experience disruptions as global water temperatures shift beyond their typical ranges. Underwater volcanic activity introduces mineral-rich fluids through hydrothermal vents, modifying local water chemistry. These vents release iron, sulfur, and other elements that marine microorganisms use for survival. The continuous flow of minerals from these deep-sea formations maintains chemical gradients critical for ocean ecosystem function. Rising carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere transfer into ocean waters, triggering a decrease in fade levels. This process, known as ocean acidification, affects the ability of marine organisms to build and maintain calcium carbonate shells and skeletal structures. Coral reefs face particular stress under these conditions as their calcium-based frameworks become vulnerable to dissolution. Ocean currents transport heat, nutrients, and dissolved gases across marine regions. Changes in water temperature influence these current patterns, affecting the distribution of essential resources throughout marine ecosystems. Cold water upwelling zones, which bring nutrient-rich water to surface layers, show signs of disruption as temperature patterns shift. Marine chemistry changes manifest in altered oxygen levels within different ocean layers. Warmer water holds less dissolved oxygen, creating expanded zones where marine life struggles to survive. These oxygen minimum zones force fish populations to relocate, disrupting established food chains and migration patterns. Salinity gradients in ocean waters face modification through increased glacial melting and altered precipitation patterns. These changes affect water density, which drives deep ocean circulation. The mixing of fresh and salt water creates new chemical conditions that marine species must adapt to or avoid. Phytoplankton populations respond to changing ocean chemistry by shifting their distribution patterns. These microscopic organisms form the base of marine food webs and produce significant portions of Earth's oxygen. Their responses to chemical changes ripple through entire ocean ecosystems. Coastal waters experience concentrated effects from both oceanic changes and terrestrial inputs. River systems carry agricultural runoff, industrial pollutants, and urban waste into marine environments, creating zones of altered chemistry near shorelines. These areas show accelerated rates of change compared to open ocean regions. Deep ocean basins serve as long-term repositories for chemical compounds entering marine systems. Substances settling into these depths can remain sequestered for extended periods, though changing circulation patterns may release stored materials back into active ocean layers. The interaction between atmospheric and oceanic chemistry creates feedback loops that influence both systems. Gas exchange at the ocean surface responds to temperature and chemical gradients, affecting both marine conditions and atmospheric composition. These exchanges maintain a dynamic balance that supports marine life. Submarine groundwater discharge introduces fresh water and land-based minerals into coastal marine environments. This process creates unique chemical signatures in nearshore waters, supporting specialized ecosystems adapted to these conditions. Changes in groundwater chemistry from human activities transfer into marine systems through these pathways. Biological processes within ocean waters both respond to and influence chemical conditions. Marine organisms extract nutrients and release waste products, maintaining chemical cycles that support ocean productivity. Disruptions to these biological functions alter the chemical balance of marine systems. Research vessels and automated monitoring systems track ocean chemistry changes across global marine regions. Data from these observations reveal patterns of change occurring at different rates and intensities throughout ocean basins. This information guides predictions of future marine conditions and their effects on ocean life. The absence of sunlight following the asteroid impact created catastrophic effects on Earth's plant life, triggering a cascade of extinctions that reshaped the planet's ecosystems. The dense cloud of debris and aerosols suspended in the atmosphere blocked solar radiation from reaching Earth's surface, preventing photosynthesis, the fundamental process plants use to create energy and sustain life. Within weeks of the impact, the initial die-off of photosynthetic organisms began in the oceans. Phytoplankton, which form the base of marine food webs, perished rapidly without access to sunlight. These microscopic organisms typically produce approximately half of Earth's oxygen and serve as primary food sources for countless marine species. Their death marked the beginning of a systemic collapse in ocean ecosystems. On land, the effects manifested through multiple stages. The first plants to succumb were those adapted to high-light environments, such as many flowering species and trees in tropical regions. These plants had evolved to require substantial sunlight and lacked mechanisms to survive prolonged darkness. Their death created gaps in canopy layers, though this went largely unnoticed as most herbivorous animals had already perished from the initial impact effects. Coniferous forests and more resilient plant species survived longer, drawing on stored energy reserves. Yet as weeks stretched into months without adequate sunlight, even these hardy species began to fail. The prolonged darkness forced plants to consume their stored energy faster than they could replenish it, leading to widespread plant death across all continents. The decomposition of dead plant matter introduced additional environmental stresses. As vegetation decayed, carbon dioxide levels rose while oxygen production plummeted. This shift in atmospheric composition further stressed surviving organisms and contributed to acidification in both terrestrial and marine environments. The loss of plant life created a domino effect through food webs. Herbivorous species that survived the initial impact faced starvation as their food sources disappeared. This nutritional deficit rippled upward through trophic levels, affecting carnivorous species that preyed upon plant eaters. The breakdown of these food chains accelerated the ongoing mass extinction. Soil systems experienced significant disruption as plant roots died and decomposed. Without living root systems to hold soil in place, erosion increased dramatically. The death of soil microorganisms that depended on plant matter and root systems further degraded soil quality, making future plant recovery more difficult. In freshwater systems, aquatic plants followed a similar pattern of decline. As these plants died, they released nutrients into the water, leading to bacterial blooms that depleted oxygen levels. These changes made many lakes and rivers uninhabitable for fish and other aquatic life. Some plants demonstrated remarkable survival strategies during this period. Seeds and spores remained dormant in soil, preserving genetic diversity for future recovery. Plants in cave systems or deep marine environments, already adapted to low light conditions, persisted through the darkness. These survivors became crucial to the eventual recovery of Earth's ecosystems. The extinction of plant species created long-lasting changes in Earth's biosphere. Many plant families disappeared entirely, while others survived only through small populations in protected areas. This reduction in plant diversity influenced the evolution of surviving animal species and shaped the composition of modern ecosystems. Recovery began slowly as the atmosphere cleared and sunlight returned to Earth's surface. Pioneer species, hardy plants capable of colonizing disturbed environments, led the regeneration process. These early colonizers modified soil conditions and created conditions favorable for other plants to return, beginning the long process of ecosystem reconstruction. The death of Earth's plant life during this period represents one of the most severe biological crises in the planet's history. The event demonstrates the critical role of plants in maintaining global ecosystems and the interconnected nature of Earth's biological systems. Modern plant communities still reflect the selective pressures of this mass extinction, with current plant diversity representing only a fraction of what existed before the catastrophe. The death of plant life triggers a catastrophic cascade effect on Earth's atmosphere. Plants serve as the primary oxygen producers and carbon dioxide absorbers through photosynthesis. Without this natural process, oxygen levels begin dropping while carbon dioxide accumulates at dangerous rates. The decomposition of dead vegetation releases methane gas into the atmosphere, adding another layer to the growing air quality crisis. Bacteria breaking down the massive amount of deceased plant matter produce significant quantities of this greenhouse gas, which traps heat and further destabilizes atmospheric conditions. Industrial emissions, which were once partially filtered by trees and other vegetation, now accumulate unchecked in the air. These pollutants mix with the increasing methane and carbon dioxide, creating a toxic atmospheric cocktail. The air becomes thick with particulate matter, making visibility poor and breathing labored. The concentration of harmful gases reaches critical levels in urban areas, where the lack of plants had already created challenges for air filtration. Cities experienced the first severe cases of mass respiratory distress. Hospitals report overwhelming numbers of patients with breathing difficulties, and emergency services struggle to maintain adequate oxygen supplies for treatment. Rural areas, previously protected by vast forests and grasslands, lose their natural air purification systems. Agricultural regions face dual challenges: toxic air and failing crops. The combination of poor air quality and minimal sunlight creates conditions where even hardy plants struggle to survive in controlled environments. The ocean's phytoplankton, responsible for producing a significant portion of Earth's oxygen, starts showing signs of stress. The changing atmospheric composition affects marine ecosystems, reducing phytoplankton's ability to photosynthesize and maintain oxygen production. This creates a feedback loop, further decreasing global oxygen levels. Air quality monitoring stations worldwide record unprecedented levels of pollutants. The atmosphere takes on a permanent haze, with particulate matter creating a visible layer of pollution that circles the globe. This atmospheric deterioration occurs faster than predicted models, catching environmental scientists off guard. People begin adapting to the new reality of limited outdoor exposure. Face masks become mandatory equipment for survival rather than choice. Air purification systems run constantly in buildings, but filters clog quickly with the increasing particulate matter. The demand for clean air creates new social dynamics, with access to filtered environments becoming a critical resource. The deteriorating air quality affects weather patterns. The high concentration of particles in the atmosphere leads to acid rain, which damages remaining vegetation and infrastructure. The combination of toxic precipitation and direct air pollution creates a compound effect on surviving ecosystems. Animals show increasing signs of respiratory distress. Both domestic and wild species struggle to adapt to the changing air composition. Veterinary clinics report rising cases of lung-related ailments across all species, indicating the universal impact of the crisis. The atmospheric changes create challenges for transportation. Aircraft engines require modifications to function in the particle-heavy air, and visibility issues affect all forms of travel. The poor air quality impacts mechanical systems, requiring new filtration methods for engines and ventilation systems. Global weather patterns shift as the atmosphere's composition changes. Temperature variations become more extreme, and traditional weather forecasting becomes less reliable. The interaction between the altered atmosphere and existing weather systems creates new and unpredictable meteorological phenomena. Scientific communities work to understand the rate of atmospheric deterioration and project future conditions. The data shows accelerating degradation of air quality, with each passing day bringing new challenges to human survival. Research facilities worldwide coordinate efforts to monitor and analyze the changing composition of Earth's atmosphere. The crisis forces innovation in air purification technology. Engineers develop new filtration systems, but the scale of atmospheric pollution overwhelms most solutions. The challenge of cleaning Earth's air becomes a primary focus of scientific research, though the magnitude of the problem dwarfs current technological capabilities. Governments implement strict emissions controls, but these measures prove inadequate against the natural release of gases from decomposing vegetation. The global nature of the crisis requires international cooperation, yet the immediate need for survival strains diplomatic relations as nations compete for remaining resources. The atmospheric changes triggered by the asteroid impact led to rapid global cooling. The dense particulate matter and gases in the upper atmosphere created a barrier that reflected solar radiation back into space, initiating a severe temperature drop across Earth's surface. Temperature records from geological data indicate a decline of 10 to 15 degrees Celsius within months of the impact. This cooling effect intensified as more sunlight was blocked, creating a feedback loop that accelerated the formation of ice sheets. The northern and southern hemispheres experienced the first signs of permanent ice accumulation, starting at the poles and gradually extending toward the equator. The cooling process transformed rain into snow across vast regions. As snow accumulated and compressed under its weight, it formed dense ice layers. These layers grew thicker and spread outward, covering increasingly larger areas. The weight of the ice sheets caused the Earth's crust to depress, creating bowl-shaped depressions that further facilitated ice accumulation. Mountain glaciers formed first, with ice flowing down valleys and merging into larger ice masses. The process gained momentum as the white ice surfaces reflected more sunlight, intensifying the cooling effect. This albedo feedback mechanism accelerated the spread of ice sheets across continents. The advancing ice reshaped landscapes, scraping away soil and rock, carving deep valleys, and depositing massive ridges of debris. The ice sheets reached thicknesses of several kilometers in some regions, particularly across North America and Northern Europe. The tremendous weight of the ice caused the Earth's crust to sink by hundreds of meters in affected areas. Sea levels dropped significantly as water became locked in the growing ice sheets. This exposed continental shelves and created land bridges between previously separated landmasses. The exposed seafloor altered ocean currents, which further influenced global climate patterns and contributed to the cooling cycle. The rapid ice sheet formation disrupted ecosystems worldwide. Plant life struggled to survive in the colder conditions, leading to widespread die-offs. Animals faced severe challenges adapting to the changing environment, with many species unable to cope with the dramatic temperature decrease and habitat loss. The Ice Age brought extreme seasonal variations. Winters became longer and more severe, while summers shortened dramatically. These changes affected precipitation patterns, creating new desert regions in some areas while increasing rainfall in others. The redistribution of moisture created sharp boundaries between habitable and uninhabitable zones. Permafrost expanded across vast territories, freezing the ground to significant depths. This frozen soil trapped organic matter and prevented normal decomposition processes, preserving ancient plant and animal remains. The permafrost also released methane as it formed, adding another component to the complex atmospheric changes. The ice sheet's growth generated strong katabatic winds, which flowed down from the ice surfaces and affected regional weather patterns. These winds carried cold air masses far beyond the ice margins, extending the impact of the cooling effect. The interaction between these winds and the changing topography created new atmospheric circulation patterns. The geological record shows evidence of this rapid cooling through various indicators. Ice cores reveal changes in atmospheric composition, while sediment layers display distinct patterns characteristic of glacial periods. Plant and animal fossils from this period demonstrate the dramatic shift in species distribution and adaptation. The Ice Age marked a fundamental transformation of Earth's climate system. The combination of atmospheric changes, ice sheet growth, and altered ocean circulation created a new environmental reality that would persist for an extended period. This transformation represented one of the most significant climate shifts in Earth's recent geological history. The advancing ice sheets continued to reshape continental surfaces, creating characteristic glacial landforms that would remain long after the ice retreated. These features included moraines, drumlins, and erratic boulders, which serve as permanent markers of this dramatic period in Earth's history. The rapid onset of global cooling triggered unprecedented population movements across Earth's habitable regions. As volcanic activity intensified and ice sheets expanded, communities abandoned their ancestral lands in search of survival. The Northern Territories experienced the initial waves of displacement. Groups from Scandinavia and Northern Europe moved southward as temperatures dropped and agriculture became unsustainable. The migration patterns followed available food sources and climate-stable regions, with populations concentrating in the Mediterranean basin and North Africa. Archaeological evidence reveals abandoned settlements across vast stretches of land, marked by layers of volcanic ash and frost damage. Carbon dating of artifacts indicates these departures occurred within relatively short time spans, suggesting urgent evacuations rather than gradual relocations. The volcanic zones became particularly uninhabitable. Continuous ash falls destroyed crops and contaminated water sources, forcing entire populations to relocate. Studies of preserved human remains from this period show high levels of respiratory ailments, indicating the severe impact of volcanic pollutants on health. As people moved into more hospitable areas, population densities increased dramatically. Archaeological sites in southern Europe show multiple layers of occupation, with different cultural artifacts mixed together, a sign of various groups coexisting in limited spaces. These concentrated settlements led to new social structures and resource management systems. The migration patterns created significant demographic pressures. Skeletal remains from this period indicate increased rates of malnutrition and infectious diseases, particularly in overcrowded refuge areas. Competition for resources intensified, evidenced by defensive structures and weapons found at settlement sites. Genetic studies of modern populations reflect these ancient migration patterns. DNA analysis reveals bottleneck events where certain populations decreased significantly, followed by mixing of different genetic groups in refuge areas. This genetic evidence correlates with archaeological findings of cultural mixing in southern safe zones. Coastal regions became particularly attractive for displaced populations. Marine resources provided reliable food sources when land-based agriculture failed. Archaeological sites along Mediterranean and Atlantic coastlines show increased settlement density and sophisticated fishing technologies developed during this period. The environmental pressure forced innovations in survival strategies. Communities adapted to new food sources and developed preservation techniques for limited resources. Storage pits, smoking hearths, and advanced hunting tools from this period demonstrate these adaptations. Social structures evolved to manage larger, mixed populations. Evidence suggests the emergence of more complex leadership systems and resource distribution methods. Trading networks expanded as communities specialized in different survival strategies and exchanged goods. Language patterns shifted as populations mixed in refuge areas. Linguistic studies indicate this period marks significant changes in ancient languages, with new dialects emerging from the combination of different groups. Communication systems adapted to facilitate interaction between diverse populations. Climate refugees faced challenges beyond immediate survival. Cultural practices transformed as groups adapted to new environments and neighbors. Religious artifacts show mixing of different belief systems, indicating cultural adaptation and integration. The mass migration period left lasting impacts on human development. Settlement patterns established during this time influenced future civilizations. Many modern population centers trace their origins to these ancient refuge areas. Archaeological evidence indicates varying success rates among migrating groups. Some populations maintained cohesive cultural identities, while others merged with host communities. Material culture from this period shows both preservation and adaptation of traditional practices. The migration period created new technological advances through necessity. Tools became more sophisticated as people adapted to new environments. Innovation in clothing, shelter, and food preparation emerged from the challenges of displacement. Disease patterns changed as populations concentrated in refuge areas. Bone studies show increased instances of infectious diseases in densely populated areas. Medical practices evolved to address new health challenges in concentrated settlements. Trade routes expanded as populations moved and connected different regions. Archaeological evidence shows increased exchange of goods between distant areas. New materials and technologies spread through these expanded networks. The period marks significant changes in social organization. Evidence suggests the development of more complex hierarchies and resource management systems. These changes laid groundwork for future societal structures. Migration patterns followed available resources and climate stability. Groups moved along rivers, coastlines, and through mountain passes seeking viable settlement areas. These routes became established pathways for future population movements. The mass migration period represents a critical phase in human adaptation and survival. Population movements reshaped human geography and social structures. The period's effects continue to influence human development long after the immediate crisis passed. The global crisis intensified as populations concentrated in the diminishing habitable regions, leading to violent conflicts over basic necessities. The mass exodus from volcanic zones created unprecedented pressure on food and water supplies in safe areas, triggering widespread resource-based violence. Food shortages became acute as ash-covered farmlands ceased production and surviving agricultural zones struggled to meet demand. Commercial food distribution networks collapsed under the strain of serving dense refugee populations. Black markets emerged, controlled by armed groups who hoarded supplies and sold them at exorbitant prices. Agricultural regions transformed into heavily fortified compounds, with local militias defending crops and livestock from desperate raiders. Clean water access sparked particular brutality as ash contamination and chemical changes rendered many water sources unsafe. Communities with functioning water treatment facilities faced constant attacks. Municipal water systems broke down in numerous cities as infrastructure failed under the burden of overcrowding. Disease spread through makeshift camps where people resorted to drinking tainted water. Armed conflicts erupted between neighboring regions over control of reservoirs and aquifers. Military forces mobilized to protect strategic water sources, while civilian defense groups formed to guard local supplies. International tensions escalated as upstream nations restricted river flows to downstream countries, weaponizing water access. Government attempts to fairly ration resources largely failed as corruption and violence undermined organized distribution. Aid organizations struggled to operate as their supply convoys faced frequent attacks. Many relief workers withdrew from the most dangerous zones, leaving populations without assistance. The resource wars fractured communities as former neighbors turned against each other. Family units broke apart under the pressure to secure resources. Trust dissolved as people witnessed others willing to kill for food and water. Social structures collapsed in many areas as survival instincts overcame civilized behavior. Criminal organizations exploited the chaos, establishing control over resource stockpiles and transportation routes. They employed brutal tactics to maintain power, executing anyone who challenged their authority. Law enforcement proved ineffective against well-armed gangs who could offer food to hungry recruits. Refugee camps transformed into battlegrounds as different groups fought for control of aid deliveries. The military struggled to maintain order, often resorting to lethal force against rioting crowds at distribution points. Many soldiers deserted their posts, choosing to protect their own families instead. Rural areas experienced raids by urban refugees desperate for food. Farmers formed armed patrols to protect their lands, leading to deadly confrontations with foraging groups. Agricultural communities built defensive barriers and established strict protocols for dealing with outsiders. The violence created a feedback loop, fighting disrupted remaining food production and water treatment, causing more shortages and triggering more conflicts. Transportation networks deteriorated as fuel became scarce and roads turned unsafe. This further reduced the ability to move resources between regions. Medical facilities strained under the flow of combat casualties while lacking basic supplies. Many hospitals closed after being looted or damaged in fights over their resources. The health crisis compounded as injuries went untreated and diseases spread through weakened populations. The resource wars marked a fundamental breakdown in human cooperation and civilization. The basic systems that enabled large-scale human society ceased functioning as violence became the primary means of resource allocation. This period demonstrated how quickly social order could collapse when essential resources grew scarce. The transition to subterranean existence marked a stark shift in human adaptation following the resource conflicts. Deep beneath the degraded surface, people carved out new living spaces in natural cave systems, abandoned mines, and hastily constructed bunker networks. The initial underground settlements focused on basic survival needs. Engineers and construction workers converted existing underground infrastructure into livable spaces, reinforcing walls and ceilings while establishing proper ventilation systems. These settlements required careful planning to maintain structural integrity and prevent collapse under the weight of unstable surface conditions. Water management became a critical priority in underground communities. Teams of hydrogeologists located and tapped into underground aquifers, implementing filtration systems to make the water safe for consumption. The challenge of water distribution led to the development of gravity-fed plumbing networks that minimized the need for powered pumps, conserving precious energy resources. Food production adapted to the absence of sunlight. Agricultural specialists developed sophisticated hydroponic and aeroponic systems, growing crops under artificial lighting. Mushroom cultivation became widespread, with farms spreading through unused tunnels and chambers. Fish farming in underground reservoirs provided additional protein sources, creating self-sustaining food cycles. The psychological impact of underground living presented significant challenges. The absence of natural light and confined spaces affected mental health, leading to the implementation of specialized lighting systems that mimicked natural daylight cycles. Common areas incorporated plant life and water features to create more natural-feeling environments. Energy generation and conservation became paramount concerns. Without access to solar power, underground communities relied on geothermal energy where available, along with stored fuel supplies and human-powered generators. Every aspect of daily life required careful energy budgeting, from lighting to food production to air circulation. Social structures evolved to accommodate the constraints of underground living. Communities developed strict protocols for resource allocation, waste management, and space utilization. Living quarters were compact but efficiently designed, with shared spaces serving multiple functions to maximize limited room. Communication between underground settlements occurred through pre-existing tunnel networks and newly constructed passages. These connections became vital lifelines for trade, information exchange, and maintaining social bonds between scattered groups of survivors. Security systems protected underground entrances from surface threats and potential raiders. Communities established guard rotations and early warning systems while maintaining strict control over access points. Many settlements concealed their entrances beneath rubble or camouflage to avoid detection. Education systems adapted to preserve knowledge and train new generations in critical survival skills. Underground schools taught practical subjects like engineering, agriculture, and medicine alongside traditional academic subjects, ensuring the transmission of both survival knowledge and cultural heritage. Medical care evolved to address the unique health challenges of subterranean life. Doctors monitored populations for vitamin D deficiency, respiratory issues, and other conditions associated with underground living. Communities maintained stores of essential medicines and developed alternative treatments using available resources. Transportation within underground settlements relied on manually powered vehicles and carefully planned corridor systems. Engineers designed efficient routes that minimized energy expenditure while maintaining critical connections between different sections of the communities. Waste management required innovative solutions to prevent disease and maintain air quality. Communities implemented composting systems for organic waste, while developing methods to recycle and repurpose other materials. Water recycling became highly sophisticated, with multiple stages of filtration and treatment. The underground settlements represented a fundamental shift in human living patterns. These communities demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability, creating sustainable systems that allowed for long-term survival beneath the surface. Despite the challenges, underground living became the new normal for many survivors, offering protection from the hostile surface conditions while fostering tight-knit communities bound together by shared challenges and solutions. The transition to subterranean existence sparked rapid technological development as humans faced unprecedented challenges. The limited resources and confined spaces required innovative solutions for basic survival needs. Agricultural technology underwent significant changes with the creation of hydroponic and aeroponic systems. These soil-less growing methods maximized food production in restricted spaces while minimizing water usage. Scientists developed specialized LED lighting that replicated optimal growing conditions for different plant species, enabling year-round crop cultivation. New strains of fungi and bacteria were cultivated to break down organic matter more efficiently, creating sustainable fertilizer sources for these underground farms. Ant purification systems evolved beyond traditional filters. Bioengineered plants and specialized bacterial colonies worked together to process carbon dioxide and generate oxygen. These living air filters required minimal maintenance and adapted to various atmospheric conditions. Advanced recycling systems recovered up to 99% of breathable air, reducing the need for external ventilation. Water management became a cornerstone of underground survival. Engineers developed multi-stage filtration systems that could process contaminated water into potable supplies. These systems incorporated bacterial purification, UV sterilization, and mineral balancing to maintain water quality. Condensation collectors gathered moisture from the air, supplementing underground water reserves. The development of bioluminescent technology reduced dependence on electrical lighting. Scientists modified genes from naturally luminescent organisms to create sustainable light sources. These living lights were integrated into walls and ceilings, providing constant, low-energy illumination. The technology spread to include bioluminescent markers for navigation and emergency signaling. Medical adaptations focused on preventing new health issues that emerged from underground living. UV therapy rooms compensated for lack of natural sunlight, preventing vitamin D deficiency. Doctors developed treatments for respiratory conditions caused by enclosed spaces. New exercise routines and equipment helped maintain bone density and muscle mass in the reduced gravity environment of deeper habitats. Communication systems adapted to function through solid rock. Engineers created networks of low-frequency transmitters that could penetrate dense materials. These systems enabled contact between different underground communities and maintained links with any remaining surface installations. Quantum entanglement communications began development, promising instantaneous contact regardless of physical barriers. Waste management evolved into a closed-loop system. Bacterial processing converted organic waste into usable materials. Plastic waste underwent molecular breakdown for reuse in 3D printing. Metal recycling achieved near-perfect efficiency through new extraction methods. These advances eliminated the concept of waste, turning all materials into renewable resources. Transportation networks changed to accommodate underground conditions. Magnetic levitation systems reduced wear on tunnel infrastructure. Electric vehicles designed for confined spaces featured flexible chassis that could adapt to varying tunnel dimensions. Automated guidance systems prevented collisions in the complex network of passages. Energy generation shifted to geothermal and biochemical sources. Deep earth heat exchangers provided steady power supplies. Microbial fuel cells converted organic material directly into electricity. These systems operated continuously without external fuel sources, ensuring stable power generation for underground communities. Construction techniques incorporated living materials that could self-repair and strengthen over time. Engineered fungi mycelium created structural supports that grew stronger with age. Bacterial concrete sealed cracks automatically and responded to structural stress. These materials reduced maintenance requirements while increasing habitat safety. Social structures adapted to support mental health in enclosed spaces. Virtual reality systems recreated outdoor experiences, helping prevent claustrophobia. Community spaces featured dynamic environments that changed regularly, reducing monotony. Educational programs taught skills specific to underground survival, preparing new generations for subterranean life. Research continued into human genetic adaptation. Scientists studied natural mutations that improved underground survival capabilities. Genetic modifications enhanced night vision, strengthened bone density, and improved oxygen utilization. These changes accelerated human adaptation to the new environment. The combination of these technological advances created sustainable underground ecosystems. Each development built upon previous innovations, forming an interconnected web of survival solutions. The underground communities became self-sufficient, marking a new chapter in human adaptation. The Earth's magnetic field underwent significant changes during this period, triggered by intense volcanic activities across multiple regions. These shifts created measurable variations in the planet's protective magnetic shield, leading to observable effects on both geological and biological systems. Volcanic eruptions released massive quantities of iron-rich materials into the atmosphere, altering the distribution of magnetic minerals in Earth's crust. The redistribution of these materials influenced local magnetic field strengths and directions, creating anomalies that scientists can trace through geological records. These anomalies appear in rock formations as distinct patterns of magnetic alignment preserved in cooling magma that solidified during this period. The magnetic variations affected migration patterns of various species that relied on magnetic orientation. Birds, marine mammals, and certain fish species modified their traditional routes in response to these changes. The fossil record shows unusual distribution patterns of migratory species, indicating adaptations to new magnetic conditions. Some species developed enhanced sensitivity to magnetic fields, while others relied more heavily on visual and other sensory cues for navigation. The period saw the formation of new magnetic mineral deposits as volcanic activity introduced fresh materials to the surface. These deposits created localized magnetic fields strong enough to interfere with the natural orientation mechanisms of nearby organisms. The phenomenon led to the development of specialized adaptations in local species, particularly in areas with high concentrations of magnetic minerals. Geological evidence indicates that the magnetic shifts occurred in distinct phases, each corresponding to major volcanic events. The initial phase began with submarine volcanic activity, introducing large quantities of iron-rich materials into ocean systems. This marine volcanic activity altered the magnetic properties of ocean floor sediments, creating permanent records of these changes in the geological strata. The second phase involved continental volcanic systems, which ejected magnetic materials into the atmosphere and across land masses. These materials settled in patterns that reflected both the Earth's magnetic field at the time and local atmospheric conditions. The resulting deposits provide detailed information about the magnetic conditions during this period. The changes in magnetic field strength and direction affected the formation of minerals in living organisms. Species that previously produced magnetically aligned particles for navigation found their biological processes disrupted. New varieties of magnetotactic bacteria evolved, adapting to the modified magnetic conditions through changes in their magnetosome structures. The magnetic shifts influenced atmospheric phenomena, particularly the behavior of charged particles in the upper atmosphere. These changes left marks in the chemical composition of ice cores and sedimentary layers, providing additional data about the period's magnetic conditions. The atmospheric effects created new selection pressures for flying organisms, leading to adaptations in their navigation abilities. Plant life showed responses to the magnetic changes through alterations in growth patterns and seed distribution. Some species developed modified root systems that responded differently to the new magnetic conditions. These adaptations appear in fossil records as unusual growth patterns and distribution changes in plant populations. Marine ecosystems experienced significant effects from the magnetic shifts, particularly in areas where magnetic anomalies altered the behavior of ocean currents. These changes influenced the distribution of nutrients and the migration patterns of marine life, leading to new ecological relationships and species distributions. The period's magnetic variations left lasting effects on Earth's geology and biology. The changes created permanent records in rock formations, preserved as magnetic signatures that allow modern scientists to reconstruct the conditions of this time. These geological markers provide valuable information about the relationship between volcanic activity and magnetic field behavior. The combination of volcanic activity and magnetic shifts reshaped environments across the planet. New habitats formed in areas where magnetic conditions created unique ecological conditions. Species that adapted to these conditions developed distinct characteristics that persisted long after the magnetic field stabilized. Research continues to reveal new details about this period through analysis of geological samples and fossil records. Each discovery adds to the understanding of how Earth's magnetic field interacts with biological systems and how species adapt to magnetic changes. The evidence from this period demonstrates the interconnected nature of geological processes and biological evolution. The volcanic activity across Earth's surface initiated profound transformations in the planet's physical structure. Continuous eruptions from multiple locations forced significant alterations to existing landmasses, creating fresh geological formations and modifying established terrains. Massive lava flows spread across continents, filling valleys and creating new plateaus. The intense heat and pressure from these flows reshaped rock formations, with some areas experiencing complete metamorphosis of their underlying geological composition. Basalt deposits accumulated in layers, forming stepped landscapes that stretched for hundreds of miles. Tectonic plate movements accelerated during this period, driven by the increased volcanic activity. The plates shifted at rates far exceeding their typical few centimeters per year, causing rapid continental drift. This acceleration led to the formation of new mountain ranges as plates collided with unprecedented force. The Eurasian plate pushed against the Indian plate with such intensity that the Himalayan range gained several thousand meters in elevation within a remarkably short time frame. Coastal regions experienced dramatic changes as volcanic islands emerged from the ocean floor. These formations began as underwater volcanoes, building up layer by layer until they breached the surface. The Pacific Ring of Fire became particularly active, with new archipelagos forming and existing islands merging through continuous lava flows and geological uplift. The intense volcanic activity affected sea levels globally. As new land masses rose from the ocean floor, they displaced enormous volumes of water, causing sea levels to rise in some regions while falling in others. This redistribution of water created new coastlines, submerged some low-lying areas, and exposed previously underwater continental shelves. Rivers changed their courses as lava flows and newly formed geological features blocked their traditional paths. These redirections led to the creation of new lakes and waterways, fundamentally altering local ecosystems and drainage patterns. Some rivers carved new canyons through fresh volcanic deposits, while others disappeared entirely, forced underground by the shifting terrain. The accumulation of volcanic ash and debris created vast new plains in certain regions. These deposits, rich in minerals and organic materials, laid the foundation for future fertile lands. In some areas, the ash layers reached depths of several hundred meters, completely burying the previous landscape and creating entirely new topographical features. Subsurface changes proved equally significant. The movement of magma created new networks of caves and underground chambers. Some regions experienced substantial subsidence as magma chambers emptied, forming massive calderas that stretched for kilometers. These depressions later filled with water, creating new lakes and inland seas. The geological transformations affected mineral deposits and natural resources. New ore bodies formed as mineral-rich magma cooled and crystallized. Existing mineral deposits underwent metamorphosis due to intense heat and pressure, creating new varieties of gemstones and metallic ores. Some previously inaccessible resources became exposed through the upheaval of rock layers. Desert regions saw significant changes as volcanic activity altered wind patterns and local climate conditions. Sand dunes shifted and reformed, some becoming permanently fixed in place by lava flows. New rock formations created windbreaks, leading to the accumulation of soil and the potential for future vegetation growth. Glacial regions experienced rapid change as volcanic activity melted ice sheets and created steam explosions where magma met ice. These interactions carved new valleys and created unique geological features, including steam caves and ice-walled volcanic formations. The melting ice contributed to sea level changes and altered ocean currents. The transformation of Earth's surface created numerous microenvironments. Areas with different elevations, soil compositions, and exposure to elements developed distinct characteristics. These variations laid the groundwork for the development of diverse ecosystems once conditions stabilized enough for life to return. These geographic changes represented the most significant transformation of Earth's surface since the formation of the continents. The new landscape bore little resemblance to its previous form, with altered coastlines, mountain ranges, and valleys creating an entirely different topographical pattern across the globe. The atmospheric conditions across Earth undergo significant transformations as volcanic activity continues to alter the planet's surface. The increased number of active volcanoes injects vast quantities of gases and particulates into the atmosphere, creating new weather patterns that differ markedly from historical records. Sulfur dioxide from volcanic emissions combines with water vapor to form acid rain, which falls more frequently across large regions. These acidic precipitation events affect plant growth and soil chemistry, leading to changes in local ecosystems. The concentration of volcanic gases in the upper atmosphere blocks portions of incoming solar radiation, resulting in temperature fluctuations that vary by location and altitude. Storm systems gain strength from the temperature differentials between newly formed landmasses and existing ocean currents. Hurricanes and cyclones follow modified paths, influenced by emerging islands and altered wind patterns. The volcanic heat sources create thermal updrafts, generating localized weather phenomena including increased lightning strikes and unusual cloud formations. The redistribution of landmasses affects ocean currents, which in turn impacts global weather circulation. Cold water currents shift their traditional routes, bringing cooler temperatures to formerly warm regions. Warm water currents find new channels, heating previously cool areas and establishing different precipitation patterns. New climate zones develop as the geography continues to change. Areas once characterized by moderate rainfall transform into either arid regions or zones of heavy precipitation. Desert boundaries shift and rainforest patterns reorganize around new moisture distribution systems. The placement of mountain ranges from recent volcanic activity creates rain shadows, where one side receives abundant rainfall while the other becomes significantly drier. Wind patterns adapt to the modified terrain, forming new prevailing wind directions and seasonal variations. These atmospheric adjustments influence the distribution of volcanic ash and gases, creating feedback loops that further alter local and regional weather conditions. Trade winds shift their traditional paths, affecting maritime navigation and atmospheric circulation patterns. The interaction between ocean temperatures and air pressure systems produces different storm tracks. Areas previously protected from severe weather now experience regular storms, while former storm-prone regions see decreased activity. These changes force animal species to modify their migration patterns and adapt to new seasonal rhythms. Atmospheric moisture content varies significantly by region, influenced by the heat and gases released from volcanic activity. Some areas experience increased humidity and cloud cover, while others become clearer and drier. These moisture variations lead to the formation of new microclimates, each supporting distinct plant and animal communities. Temperature gradients between polar and equatorial regions undergo modification, affecting global air circulation patterns. The polar jet streams shift position and strength, creating new weather boundaries and influencing storm system development and movement. These changes in air mass distribution lead to modified seasonal patterns across different latitudes. The accumulation of volcanic gases in various atmospheric layers creates new temperature inversion patterns. These inversions trap air pollution and moisture near the ground in some regions, while allowing for increased vertical mixing in others. The varying atmospheric stability affects local weather development and the distribution of precipitation. Snow and ice patterns change as temperature and precipitation zones shift. Regions that rarely saw snowfall now experience regular winter precipitation, while traditional snow-covered areas become rain-dominated. These modifications in frozen precipitation patterns affect water storage and seasonal runoff cycles. Fog and low cloud formation patterns adapt to the new geographic and temperature conditions. Coastal areas experience changes in marine layer development, while inland regions see new patterns of valley fog formation. These low-level moisture patterns influence local temperature ranges and growing conditions. The atmospheric changes create new challenges for weather prediction and monitoring. Traditional forecasting models require updates to account for the modified circulation patterns and geographic influences. Weather stations track these emerging patterns, building new databases to understand and predict the evolving atmospheric conditions. The altered environmental conditions trigger unprecedented rates of adaptation among Earth's surviving organisms. Plants develop thicker leaves with specialized coatings to withstand increased ultraviolet radiation and extreme temperature fluctuations. Root systems extend deeper into the soil, searching for water tables that shifted during the geological upheaval. Insects demonstrate remarkable genetic plasticity, with multiple generations adapting within months rather than centuries. Ants modify their social structures, building deeper colonies to escape surface heat. Beetles evolve enhanced exoskeletons that reflect more sunlight and retain moisture. Moths shift from nocturnal to crepuscular patterns, active during the brief periods between extreme heat and cold. Birds showcase rapid physical transformations. Their wings become broader to handle stronger wind currents, while beaks adapt to new food sources. Many species develop darker feathers to absorb heat during cold spells, coupled with more efficient panting mechanisms to cool down during hot periods. Migration patterns shift dramatically as traditional routes become impassable due to permanent storm systems. Mammals face intense selective pressure. Small rodents breed faster, producing generations with denser fur and modified metabolisms. Their incisors grow stronger to access tough, fibrous plants that now dominate the landscape. Larger mammals struggle more with the rapid changes. Those that survive show signs of decreasing body size, following Bergmann's rule in reverse as temperatures rise. Marine life undergoes equally dramatic transformations. Fish populations move deeper to escape warming surface waters, developing enhanced pressure tolerance and low light vision. Coral species that survive the die-off show accelerated calcification rates, building stronger structures to withstand acidic conditions. Shellfish produce thicker shells in response to ocean acidification, though this adaptation costs them significant energy. Microorganisms lead the adaptation race. Bacteria and fungi evolve new metabolic pathways, breaking down previously indigestible compounds. Some bacteria develop the ability to process metals and minerals exposed by geological activity, creating new ecosystem niches. Sorter microbes adapt to extreme feed variations, maintaining critical nutrient cycles despite challenging conditions. Plant-pollinator relationships transform as flowering times shift. Insects adjust their life cycles, but mismatches occur frequently. New pollination partnerships emerge. Some plants switch from insect to wind pollination, while others develop self-pollinating mechanisms. The timing of seed dispersal changes to match new seasonal patterns. Predator-prey dynamics shift dramatically. As some prey species decline, predators broaden their diets or specialize on newly abundant food sources. Pack hunting becomes more common as individual hunting success rates drop. Some predators develop new hunting strategies to deal with reduced vegetation cover and changed prey behavior. Symbiotic relationships evolve rapidly. Tree species form new partnerships with fungi, sharing resources to survive stress conditions. Bacteria develop enhanced relationships with plant roots, improving nutrient absorption in poor soils. Animals form new cleaning partnerships, removing parasites that proliferate in warmer conditions. The genetic bottleneck created by mass extinctions accelerates speciation in surviving populations. Isolated groups develop distinct traits as they adapt to local conditions. Hybrid zones form where previously separated species meet in newly habitable areas. Some organisms show signs of polyploidy, whole genome duplications that enable rapid adaptation. Behavioral adaptations prove as significant as physical changes. Animals modify their daily activity patterns to avoid temperature extremes. Social species alter their group sizes and structures to match resource availability. New communication methods evolve as atmospheric conditions affect traditional signals. Disease resistance becomes a critical factor in survival. Populations that survive initial outbreaks pass on enhanced immune responses to offspring. New pathogens emerge as environmental conditions favor different microorganisms. Host-parasite relationships shift as both sides adapt to changed conditions. These rapid evolutionary changes create cascading effects through ecosystems. As species adapt, they alter their environments, creating new selective pressures for other organisms. The pace of change forces many species to adapt through phenotypic plasticity rather than genetic selection, testing the limits of their adaptive capacity. The intense gravitational forces from the passing celestial body triggered profound changes within Earth's internal structure. The planet's iron-nickel core experienced significant disruption, leading to alterations in its rotation speed and magnetic field generation. Seismic data indicated that the outer core's liquid metal composition underwent partial solidification in certain regions while becoming more fluid in others. These changes created new convection patterns, affecting the geodynamo responsible for Earth's magnetic field. The field strength fluctuated dramatically, dropping to 15% of its original intensity in some areas while doubling in others. The mantle layer between the core and crust developed new circulation patterns. Hot spots shifted position, and previously stable regions became tectonically active. The asthenosphere, a partially molten layer beneath the lithosphere, experienced temperature variations that modified its viscosity. These modifications resulted in changed rates of plate movement across the planet's surface. Deep within the inner core, pressure waves caused by the gravitational event created zones of varying density. The crystalline structure of the solid inner core reorganized, producing new patterns of seismic wave propagation through the planet. Scientists detected these changes through variations in P waves and S waves traveling through Earth's interior. The core mantle boundary, a critical transition zone, underwent substantial reformation. The D layer, marking this boundary, showed evidence of chemical exchange between the core and mantle materials. This interaction led to the formation of previously unknown mineral phases and altered the thermal gradient between these major planetary layers. Volcanic activity increased as magma chambers responded to the changed internal pressures. New fissures opened in oceanic crust, while existing volcanic systems modified their eruption patterns. The Hawaiian hotspot chain shifted its position, creating submarine volcanoes in unexpected locations. Iceland experienced the emergence of new volcanic vents as the mid-Atlantic ridge adjusted to the modified mantle flow. The changes extended to Earth's rotational dynamics. The planet's moment of inertia shifted as mass redistributed within the core and mantle. This resulted in minor but measurable variations in day length and altered the wobble in Earth's axial precession. The redistribution of mass also affected ocean tides, creating new patterns of marine circulation. Earthquakes revealed the extent of these internal changes. Seismic events occurred in previously stable regions as stress patterns within the lithosphere adjusted to the new internal configuration. The Pacific Ring of Fire showed modified patterns of seismic activity, with some subduction zones becoming more active while others grew quieter. These core alterations influenced the planet's heat distribution. Some regions of the crust experienced increased heat flow from the interior, leading to the formation of new geothermal systems. Other areas cooled as mantle convection patterns shifted, affecting local climate and ecosystem development. The modified internal structure created changes in the planet's gravity field. Satellite measurements detected variations in gravitational acceleration across Earth's surface, reflecting the reorganized mass distribution within the planet. These gravity anomalies affected ocean currents and atmospheric circulation patterns. Mineral deposits formed under the new conditions as hydrothermal systems responded to changed temperature and pressure gradients. Novel ore bodies developed where rising magma encountered groundwater, creating economic deposits with unique chemical compositions. These new mineral formations provided evidence of the altered planetary processes operating below the surface. The transformations within Earth's core initiated a cascade of effects through the planet's systems. Each change in the internal structure led to corresponding adjustments in crustal dynamics, surface processes, and environmental conditions. These modifications continued to propagate through Earth's systems, establishing new patterns of planetary behavior that would persist for geological timescales. The stabilization period following major geological events marks a distinct phase in Earth's development. After intense volcanic activity, tectonic shifts, and core processes reshape the planet's structure, environmental conditions settle into modified patterns that persist for extended timeframes. Temperature variations establish fresh baselines across different regions. Areas previously characterized by moderate climates might experience sustained higher or lower averages, creating different ecological pressures on local species. These altered thermal patterns influence precipitation cycles, wind currents, and ocean circulation, leading to permanent changes in weather systems. Atmospheric composition adjusts to reach equilibrium points that differ from previous states. The mix of gases present in the air transforms through chemical reactions triggered by volcanic emissions, affecting the greenhouse effect and radiation balance. Carbon dioxide levels, methane concentrations, and other atmospheric components find new stable ratios that shape the planet's heat retention characteristics. Ocean chemistry undergoes lasting modifications. The interaction between seawater and altered atmospheric gases produces shifts in phase levels, mineral content, and dissolved oxygen concentrations. These changes ripple through marine food chains, affecting the distribution and behavior of aquatic species. Currents might follow different paths or vary in strength, creating new patterns of nutrient transport and temperature distribution across ocean basins. Land surfaces display permanent alterations in their physical properties. Rock types exposed at the surface change through uplift or erosion, affecting soil composition and drainage patterns. New mountain ranges or depressions influence local weather patterns and create barriers or corridors for species movement. The distribution of minerals near the surface shifts, impacting the resources available for biological processes. Plant communities adapt to these modified conditions through changes in species composition and distribution. Certain plants become more prevalent in areas where they'd previously struggled, while others retreat from regions that no longer support their growth requirements. These botanical shifts cascade through food webs, affecting herbivore populations and their predators. Animal populations respond to the transformed environment through behavioral and demographic changes. Species migrate to areas that match their survival needs, leading to new competitive interactions and predator-prey relationships. Some populations might expand their ranges, while others contract into smaller territories or face local extinctions. Soil ecosystems develop different characteristics based on the new environmental parameters. Microbial communities shift in response to altered moisture levels, temperature patterns, and available nutrients. These changes affect decomposition rates, nutrient cycling, and the chemical properties of soil profiles, influencing plant growth patterns and groundwater quality. Water cycles establish modified patterns of movement through the environment. Precipitation timing and intensity adjust to new atmospheric conditions, affecting river flow rates and groundwater recharge. Some areas experience increased rainfall, while others become drier, leading to long-term changes in local hydrology and ecosystem function. Coastal zones adapt to different sea levels and wave patterns. Shoreline configurations change through erosion and deposition processes operating under new environmental conditions. Marine ecosystems near the coast respond to altered water chemistry and temperature profiles, developing different species assemblages and food web structures. Seasonal cycles display modified timing and intensity. The onset of spring, summer, fall, and winter might shift, affecting biological processes tied to seasonal changes. Migration patterns, breeding seasons, and plant flowering times adjust to these altered seasonal rhythms, creating new temporal patterns in ecosystem function. Energy flow through ecosystems follows different pathways under the new conditions. The relative abundance of primary producers changes, affecting the distribution of resources through food webs. Predator-prey relationships adjust to new patterns of species distribution and abundance, establishing different trophic structures. Mineral cycles operate at different rates and follow modified pathways through the environment. The weathering of rocks, transport of sediments, and deposition of minerals proceed under new chemical and physical conditions. These changes affect soil formation processes and the availability of nutrients for biological systems. The establishment of these new patterns creates stable conditions that persist until the next major perturbation of Earth's systems. This stability allows ecosystems to develop adapted structures and functions that reflect the modified environmental parameters, forming the foundation for future evolutionary changes.